Welcome to Creating Your Happy Place, a podcast that explores how our spaces support or sabotage our happiness and then empowers you to do whatever it takes to get happy at home. I'm Rebecca West, host of Creating Your Happy Place and author of the book Happy Starts at Home, and I'm so glad you're here today. Now, we've all been spending a lot of time in our homes lately, and many of us are starting to feel a bit trapped in our spaces. So with that in mind, I thought it would be really great to hear from an expert on small space living so that we can all take away some tricks for making our homes live large, no matter what size they are. Our guest today has been living tiny since before it was cool to live tiny. I am thrilled to welcome to the show, currently living in New York with her husband and 5-year-old son in a 690 square foot apartment, author of the book, The Little Book of Living Small, Laura Felton. Welcome, Laura.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here today. Now, I read your book cover to cover, and I love all the case studies you shared of folks that are living tiny all over the United States. And what I'm wondering is, when you interviewed all the people who were living small, did you find anything that you all had in common? Like, was there something about each of the families who were living small that made it suit them especially well, or could anybody really do this?
I think that anybody could do it. The common thread between all the homeowners and renters and families and single people featured in the book was that they were choosing to live small. It was all people who had made some level of conscious choice to choose a smaller home over a larger home. And they were all people who had at one point or another lived in bigger places. So they knew that, when they were saying less is more, it was from lived experience.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think when all of us have choice, we don't feel as trapped. That's one of the reasons why we all do feel a little bit more trapped right now, because we don't feel like we're in control over our choices. Not everybody gets to live small on purpose,
Correct.
right?
There are many people who are living small because they have to. And this book is really celebrating people who made a choice to live small and to, choose a smaller lifestyle.
Although I would say that the book is really, it's celebrating living small, and I would say it's encouraging living small, but it's really filled with practical advice for living small, kind of whether you meant to or you didn't mean to. It's going to help you
Sure.
do it well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it could definitely have tips for people who find themselves living small and, was
By
not.
by no choice of their own. Was there anything, I mean, you've been living small for a long time. This book
Mhm.
is new, but your experience isn't. Was there anything that surprised you as you went through and researched the book?
Um, well, one of the reasons I wanted to write the book was because a lot of the books about small spaces that were on the market and available were filled with people's second homes or Airbnbs or their guest house to their larger home. And I really wanted to show people's the place that they lived, the place that they lived all the time. So that was part of why I wanted to write this book. And going and seeing all the homes and meeting all the people was fun. It was fun to see the different ways that people live and, poke around in all the corners of their homes.
Yeah, and
Um,
those corners are very meaningful because part of small space living is using every corner, every nook and cranny.
yes. And, we shot the homes as they were. We didn't bring in stylists or truckloads of props like magazines often do. My main career is writing for magazines, so I know what that looks like. This was a very documentary type of experience. And of course, we were shooting homes on their very best day. Everybody had tidied up before we
Of
came,
course.
and we made the house look its best. But it was a real look inside people's real lives, how they're really living.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that so much. And I also noticed that you didn't just corral it into this has to be your full-time home, because anybody can live small when they're just vacationing, that's pretty straightforward. But full-time, with all the full-time demands, that's a bigger demand on a small space. But you also constrain the size of the houses. So, everybody has a different concept of what living small means.
Yes.
And we don't want to pass judgment, because if somebody's going from a 4,000 square foot house to a 3,000 square foot house, they're going to be going through a lot of the same challenges. But your book focused or capped it at a certain size. Can you remind me what that size was?
Yeah, we My editor and I talked a lot about this, about what was small. I wasn't super interested in tiny homes for this book. There are other books devoted to people living in tiny homes, and that is like a really unique category of home on its own. So we said for a single person, less than 400 square feet. For two people living together, I think it was 700, and then after that it was 300 per person up to 1,200 square feet. And there are two homes in the book that were hit that 1,200 square foot mark, and they were both families of four.
And it's interesting when you're looking at the pictures. The number of the early stories are those smaller spaces, and then
Yeah.
you land on a couple of the 1200s, and they seem very, very spacious all of a sudden, because
Yeah.
everything's relative, right?
Yes, and 1,200 square feet is much smaller than the average house in America
Oh, it is.
today. And in particular, a 1,200 square foot home that doesn't also have a basement and a garage, an attic, and all
Mhm.
those lovely places to hide stuff away in. So 1,200 is pretty small, but it's certainly not tiny. It's just smaller than average.
Yeah. And speaking of hiding things away, the other thing you do talk about in your book is you're saying don't just go rent a storage unit and hide all your stuff in it. That's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and I feel pretty strongly about that. But since the book has come out, I've heard some pushback on that from people who feel just as passionately that they need their storage spaces to make their lives work wherever they live. My own experience with storage space and what I've observed with others is that um, the things that are in there are certainly not being used in any meaningful way. And they're being saved for some day that almost never arrives. Certainly, there are times between moves or really big life transitions when storage might be appropriate, but it's not a cure-all to a lack of space in your home. I think we should be living with the things we need and use every day.
And I think that there are exceptions to any rule, right? So
Yes,
I'm
of
sure that
course.
there are lots of people who have a very active storage unit and they're in and out of it a couple times a week, and it's kind of an extension of their home. But the reality is, for a lot of people, that storage unit is something you access once or twice a year, maybe. And it's just about being honest with ourselves, right? If you have a very active storage unit and you're always in and out of it, then obviously it's a very effective use of space. But if you haven't touched it in 3, 6, 9 months, 3, 6, 9 years sometimes, then you want to reevaluate, is the way you're spending your money in that space of benefit.
Yeah, and I mean, I know people who professionally will keep a storage space maybe for their equipment, or prop stylists often have one for their
Hmm.
props. And that is a whole another scenario. My own experience with storage, I had a storage space for 6 months once. I was selling an apartment and moving, and our real estate broker had very gently suggested we might want to move things out of the house to show it. And we were like, sure, yeah, great, we'll do that. And I paid a premium to have a storage space near my home because I thought for sure I would need to be getting in there to get to stuff. And in the 6 months, we never went there once.
Amazing.
And at the end of it, my husband and I looked around and we said, what is in here? What is this huge, huge, huge closet full of stuff that we lived without for 6 months? And I think that for a lot of people, what is hiding in those storage spaces, they no longer even specifically know what's in there.
Yeah, yeah, and I think sometimes there's a lot of categories, right? Stuff that somebody gave you or that you inherited that you don't really feel that you can get rid of, either out of guilt or because somebody else might want it, or because there's the category of things that you might need someday, or the stuff that you used to like but you're not really sure you like it anymore. Like there's so many categories that stuff can
Yeah.
fall into. But I'm wondering, was it psychologically easier to get rid of a lot of that stuff because you didn't, at the time you were storing it, know you were getting rid of all that stuff? Because it's hard to downsize.
Yes, I think it was. And I think that kind of concurrently was around the time I really had a big awakening about sustainability. And that has influenced a lot of my thinking about what we ought to keep in our homes, and what is needed versus what is excess.
Because you talk about in your writing that you're doing this not just for your family. Like you say, living small will save you stress and money and lots of things that are of a personal benefit, but you're also linking it to that global benefit of your footprint and your impact on the world at large.
Yeah, I mean, choosing to live in a smaller space is one of the things that an individual really can do to greatly reduce their carbon footprint and their energy usage. And it certainly is a choice towards a more sustainable life.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a quote on page 83 from one of your interviewees, Jacqueline Schmidt, and she said, "Getting rid of stuff is the easiest, most affordable way to create space." So I guess I'm wondering, do you think that that is really what this all comes down to? Because that's actually really hard work.
I mean, I think in the book, Jacqueline's home is definitely the most minimalist of the homes featured in the book. And Jacqueline made a pretty big life change to go from someone who was a collector to someone who had a very spare look. I think that you can live small as someone who likes a very empty, Zen, minimal type of home, or you can have a home that is filled with books and stuff and sort of more of a maximalist look. I do think that for me, I feel best in my home when it is ordered and tidy, and I know where things are and it's easy to access them. And there's not some like set number of possessions or some magic formula for like what is right, but I think that in your gut when your home is filled with too much, with excess, and then when you need to start to do some of that work of paring back. It's more of like a feeling than a prescription.
Yeah, there's a fashion guru, I can't remember who said it, but somebody who said, take off the last accessory that you put on.
Yeah. And perhaps the last thing you brought home from XYZ, there's so many ways to think about. A lot of people talk about like a one in, one out policy as a way of maintaining balance at home, but definitely decluttering can really be a magic bullet to making your space feel like it can breathe again.
But as you say, it doesn't have to be minimalist. There's one of the case studies, I can't remember her name, but she was very maximalist. She had deep, rich colors on her walls and wallpaper everywhere on the ceilings.
Mm.
Um,
That's Shavonda Gardner, who is
yes.
a blogger and designer, and she's not a minimalist. Neither is Ellen O'Neill, was another woman living in New York City apartment who, again, a collector. So there's no one way to
Not prescriptive.
yeah.
Hmm. So, I'm curious about you. Did you
Okay.
grow up living tiny? Did you grow up in a giant house? How did what you experienced as a child influence what you're doing now?
Well, I grew up in a pretty big house.
Yeah.
When I was very young, I lived in New York City with my parents, and then they moved out to the suburbs, and I grew up in a big old Victorian house.
Wow.
I don't know the exact square footage, but it was a very big house. And a beautiful house, and a house that my parents took a lot of pride in, and a house that I watched them, strip paint from old wainscoting and wallpaper and the 80s decorative painting on the walls. They really loved their home, and their home was a big part of their identity. So that definitely influenced my thinking about home, that it made me hold it as something to value. But then for me, living small, it was a natural byproduct of living in New York City.
Right.
You move to New York City, you're going to be living small.
Yeah. Even the big houses are small houses.
Yes. And I'd say for me, there were points where I made choices where I was choosing something over space. I would rather live alone as a young woman in New York in a tiny studio than have a bigger amount of space with a roommate. So, kind of weighing pros and cons. For me, often I would choose less square footage for maybe a better neighborhood or more privacy or better daylight. I never felt a big pressure to have more space.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to choice again. For my husband and I, we don't live in a very small home. It's just under 2,000 square feet. But the choices we make about what we have in it, where we spend our money and stuff, it's all related to choice. We'd rather go on a trip to Italy rather than buy a very expensive rug or something. So we have nice rugs, but they're from Overstock instead of from someplace more expensive because we're making choices with our money that are then reflected in our homes.
Yes, exactly.
But it sounds like I don't want to make any assumptions, but it sounds like growing up in a home that your parents did cherish so much influenced the relationship you have with your home, even though you chose to go tiny instead of big.
Yeah, and my parents, their values in home, even though we live in very different types of homes, I think are very shared. And I, you know, live my life in a very similar way to them, just in a much smaller space.
I noticed in the book, I think it's near the end, that you did kind of give a message to your readers that it was about pushback, like that as if they're choosing to live small, that they may get some pushback from friends and family members. Where did
Yeah.
that come from? Was that something you experienced or was that something you've seen?
When we purchased the home that we live in today, we were expecting a baby, and we bought a 1 bedroom, which we kind of turned into a very small 2 bedroom. And my parents said, "Are you sure you don't want, a bigger apartment? Shouldn't you get a real 2 bedroom?" And the the math, on the napkin said, "No way, we are getting this smaller apartment." And no regrets. We are so happy that we kept our overhead low, particularly during this uncertain economic time
Mhm.
right now. We have friends who did what my parents were hoping we would do, which was to stretch our budget to get the biggest place we could afford. And some of them now, have some regrets about the bigger debt that they took on and the bigger liability that their home represents in like their larger financial picture. So,
Mhm.
um, what your family, and I think it's hard for parents too, to see that their children aren't living the same lives they were. And I think that there is also something larger and societal going on here about our parents' generation and ours,
Mhm.
that may be represented here that they are uncomfortable with. That, we may not in our lifetimes experience the wealth and affluence that they were blessed the time they lived in, to enjoy. And so there may be some discomfort from your family members if you are choosing something different than what they chose and what they might expect.
Well, and there's also, no matter what size home you have, there's a lot of chapters we go through, and one of them is when our parents start to downsize, and then they go, "Hey, who wants the things we own and that we've collected and that we love over the years?" And
Yes.
if you have a larger home, that's actually, I think, an even harder conversation because if you technically have room, then it can be hard to be like, "Oh, I don't want your set of dishes for 100 people," But living small, at least that gives you a little bit of a filter. You'd be like, I would love to have that stuff, but we just don't have room.
Yes. And these, I'm learning with my own parents and my husband's parents. I mean, these are tricky things to navigate. My mother, I think, knows in her heart that my sister and I don't want 90% of what's in their home, but she's not letting go while she's still on this earth. She doesn't want to hear anything about downsizing because she loves her things and she's very sentimental about her things.
Absolutely. And
So
you write a lot of articles. You write, I think, for Parents Magazine, right? As I recall.
yeah,
And
I
that's
was
that.
I was on staff there for many years, and today I'm a freelance writer, and they're someone who I still write for.
Right. So, and that's frequently aimed towards parents of younger children, right? So you're like, how am I navigating being a parent? But you're now, you are the daughter of parents,
Yeah.
right? And now you are a parent. And so you're navigating it from two sides. When you think about your son growing up and what he's learning from you in your small space, what are you hoping he takes away?
I think I would be really proud if he values experiences over things, if he comes to understand sort of the value of enough. He's 5 right now, and I mean, he has all the unfiltered, little kid envy that it's very real, and it's stuff I didn't know I would be navigating. Things like, I mean, he'll even say, oh, so and so has more toys than me. And
Interesting.
to then have to say, well, we have enough, and this is what we have room for in our home. And to really talk through those values, it's a daily task for parents, whether it's living small or it's just a conscious choice to be less of a consumer, in whatever obsession
Right.
we have.
It'll be so interesting to watch him grow up over the years and see if he turns into, he rebels and turns into a maximalist, or if he really embraces those values and ends up being a small space dweller himself.
Yeah, I mean, I have a friend who we had a conversation about. He grew up as a first generation American, son of immigrants, and he said that his mother's thriftiness, particularly with regards to things at the home, he did find himself rebelling against when he was an adult living on his own. He said, I'm going to take the longest shower I feel like. And, his natural impulse was to go the other way and to be less thrifty than his parents had. And that, he sort of had to redirect to think more now about conserving resources.
Right. And I think we all go through a rebellion phase, and then out of that, we can figure out our own road. Like, what do we want to keep from what we learned, and what do we want to bring in that's new for ourselves? Just like you've been doing with creating your own small space that you guys live in. Are there any specific rules that you once thought you had to follow when it came to creating home that you've since realized you do not have to follow?
Well, there weren't a lot of rules in my house growing up about the home, but I do think this habit of like keeping everything. My mom's the kind of person who keeps every gift she ever received and every object she ever inherited. I don't feel that need, and that for me would be the big change between my experience growing up and my experience as an adult. I feel much more free to let things go.
And how do you navigate that? What do you like? Because there's the thing where somebody's Aunt Sophie is always, whenever she visits, she's going to be looking for the gift she gave you. Like, does that ever cause you an anxiety? And do you just re-gift things? Do you send them to Goodwill? Do you return things? Do you not accept the gift at the beginning? How do you do it?
Our family has very much come around to understanding that we're not people who want things to fill up our home. And then I don't know if that's something we over time communicated, but we don't have too much of that. But I mean, there were definitely wedding gifts that, they went straight to our local home charity shop. I'm not like this sort of super minimalist person who can just get rid of things. Sometimes it'll even take me years to get rid of something if there is like a sentimental attachment to it. but I think I have like a pretty good radar at this point for like when something really just, if it's not being used, that is when I feel like it's time to let it go. That my great aunt Susie or my uncle, they are not going to want me to keep something in my home that is not used or loved. But one thing I do really try to do is I try to rehome things specifically rather than just dumping a box of stuff at the Goodwill. We like to try to give things to friends or to neighbors. For me, that looks like the neighborhood mom's listserv saying, we're getting rid of our crib finally, who wants that? Or we also use Craigslist as a way to give things away for free. Sometimes if it's a big ticket item, I'll be selling it. But I really hate just sort of like throwing all your crap in a bag and dropping it off for somebody else to deal with. I feel like that means that there's a good chance some of those things will end up in the landfill, and that there's no guarantee that they're going somewhere where they will be used. So I really love to try to do the work of like finding the next home for my belongings.
That's really lovely. I love that. What do you think people don't think about when it comes to creating a home? That they, if they thought about it a little bit more, might make the journey a little bit easier.
Um, I do think that if people could really take the mantra of less is more to heart, they might find greater contentment. It's so easy to want more and to, desire the Instagram perfect room or the extra room for the home office that we all want right now. But to really just try to find peace with what you do have and making the most of what you do have, and knowing that it is probably much more than what many people have.
Well, and you gave a piece of advice, I think later in the book, about um, I think editing what you follow, right? So rethinking all of the newsletters that you're subscribed to and Instagram accounts that you follow, right? So talk a little bit about how, because, especially as an author, you want people following you on Instagram because that's how we read
Yeah.
books. But you were really speaking to their wellness when it comes to what they're allowing into their eyeballs. What's that balance?
Um, well, I think that for me, if there's not triggers for want, that is helpful. I mean, we are really vigilant about keeping catalogs out of our house. I don't like to get emails from brands that I have shopped with before where they're trying to tell me there's a sale. So I'm a pretty aggressive unsubscriber. I'm a person who calls up and says, take me off the mailing list, because that just feels like noise to me. And then in terms of like the bubble of social media, it's super addicting stuff. And I think we all struggle with like finding balance with how we consume social media. But I try to just really limit the time that I'm looking at it and not have it be a constant throughout my day. For me, that's the filter I'm putting on, is to try and find set times that I do sit down and have my mindless scroll. Because it also is an opportunity to meet people and connect with people. And I find myself now referring to friends who are people I've never met in real life, but who have become my friends because of the connections we've made online. So there's good and there's bad.
Yeah, and that's true with everything, right? Everything can be taken to an extreme in any direction. So it's about finding the right balance for yourself, which takes us back to small space living because it's exactly the same thing. I would kind of think, and I don't know if this is true, I really like changing up my home. I like tweaking it and refreshing it and adding a new paint color over here, a new throw pillow over there. But I would think in small spaces that they might be a little bit more static because there's less rooms to change. Is that your experience, or do they kind of change and morph over time just as much as larger spaces?
Um, I mean, I think that it depends on the person. Some people that is their natural, just like everything is changing all the time. Um, my homes tend to have a sort of slow and constant change that happens just sort of naturally over time. And sometimes it'll be triggered by you find something wonderful that you can't possibly say no to and you want to bring it home. Or recently, in my case, my sister said to me, hey, this rug I've had for 10 years. I'm not using it anymore. Do you want it back? And I said, oh yeah, I'll take that back. And like we switched all the rugs and all the rooms, trying to find a new spot for like what was for me like something coming back into my life. And when you have a young child, like we do, that sort of piece of it is always in flux, always changing. And I think that we all have changed our homes a lot in recent months, trying to accommodate working from home, schooling from home. So, life kind of forces change on you whether you like it or not.
So true. So true.
And for
But
me, like the decorative things you're thinking about, I mean, for example, like on our sofa, we, instead of having new like pillows all the time, we just get new covers for the throw pillows, and those take up such a little amount of space to store. It's something that I can change. And there's like my summer ones, my winter ones, that doesn't, take up a ton of space. In a small space, bedding is something that like makes a huge, enormous change when you make your bed in a different way, going from all white to brightly colorful. That's like instantly your whole home looks different.
yeah, absolutely. Like each choice you make has a much bigger impact, which I think can
Mhm.
be frustrating for some of my design clients in big homes. You can put a ton of energy and a ton of money into making changes and feel like you didn't even get anywhere because there's so much left to do. Whereas with a small space, your energy and your effort and your money goes a lot further with each choice because there's not as much on the to-do list, I would think.
Yeah, and it also, it's the same thing with mess. If a small space is messy, it is messy. And once you tidy up and get everything neat, it is, like you're done. Like that is, the whole house is neat. It's not just, you managed to get through the ground floor.
Right.
So there is some truth in that in a small space, all of your actions have a bigger impact.
Yeah. Now I think you bought this apartment and it was a one-bedroom apartment. That's 5, 6 years ago now.
Yeah, it was about 5.5 years ago before we knew we were having a baby and our lease was running out. And that was, it was time to figure out what was next. And our apartment was laid out, was from the 1940s, with what would have been a separate dining alcove. And we were really fortunate in the layout. It was that could easily be turned into a place to sleep. And so that was what we chose to do. When we saw the apartment, it was being marketed as a 1 bedroom, but we looked and said, that looks like, a place a baby crib could go. But funnily, after we'd been living there for about a year, we switched and we took the smaller room, the former dining alcove, and we gave our baby at the time the like proper bedroom because we wanted him to be able to sleep without us waking him up in the early evenings when we were at home.
Well, I noticed that I can't remember if it was a case study or just one of your solutions in the book. You said that it's actually quite common for people in those tiny homes to have a Murphy bed like in the living room where the adults are sleeping so the kids can be put away at night into their bedrooms and the adults can stay up later and not have to be tucked away into their own bedrooms too. So
Yeah,
similar to
Crystal Ann Nielsen, who is a designer and influencer, she was featured in the book, and her home has exactly that setup.
that.
She has moved since then and still has a Murphy bed in the living room. And my sister, for many years, had a Murphy bed in her living room and let the kids have the bedroom. So I think it is fairly common in places like New York or San Francisco where real estate is at such a premium that families might be staying in 1 bedroom longer.
Well, I think one of the takeaways there is room labels are meaningless, Right. You don't have to make a dining room just because somebody called it a dining room.
Yeah, and I think that I think Albert Hadley kind of said the quote of forget the floor plans, like arrange the furniture how you want to do the living. And that's
Mm.
definitely true. Throughout the book, there are so many examples of people using space in new ways. Shafronda Gardner, who you mentioned before, who has a very bold maximalist style, she and her wife took what was like the den and made that their bedroom and gave the kids the two proper bedrooms in their house. There's definitely no rules about what room is what. And then the other thing is families change. Shira Gill, who we photographed her house one way, 6 months later, her kids, her office, her husband, like they'd all switched rooms and found a new, equation that worked for their family. And I think that that is something that if you want to live small, you have to be ready to adapt and try new things and see what works.
And that actually leads to a question I always like to ask, which is we know, especially when we are doing things on our own, not everything is a success, right? We
Yeah.
do experiment. What would you say is one of the experiments that you've tried that didn't work out, a design failure that you might have learned from and then went a different road on?
I have a hard time with color.
Oh.
You may notice my home is very white walled, and I lived in a lot of white walled places. I've had some real errors along the way. My one bedroom that I lived in Brooklyn in my sort of mid and late 20s, I painted the bedroom a terrible color of green. It was like, I think I did it on New Year's Day. It was a fresh start, trying something new. And it was just the wrong color. It was not a good color. And I lived with it for 6 months. And that is my regret, is that I didn't just, as soon as I knew it was wrong, fix it. And I will also confess very recently, we painted our bathroom a very dark color and I hate it. So we're gonna go back to white there too.
That's really interesting. What makes you keep experimenting with color? It seems like you're quite happy with that bright white space.
I greatly admire homes that are full of color. I mean, that is like who I love to follow on Instagram, is people with like bright, bold, colorful style. And the research that I have read also suggests that color does make people happy and energizes their spaces and can make a space more stimulating to be in. I don't know. I need a color consultant maybe.
Maybe. Although I find that the spaces that I like to vacation in versus live in are different. I'm the opposite of you. I need color in my home,
Yeah.
but I love following these wonderful, bright, airy, plant-filled spaces. They're just gorgeous. But if I were to move into one, I'd be like, okay, what are we painting first? So I think that there's something in us that craves a certain vibe for our everyday living. And I think the house also has a vote. The house we're actually remodeling right now is going to be mostly white, and I can't get my head around this. It's crazy. But it's like the house has its desires too. The architecture speaks to what it wants as well. And
Sure. And the light too. I mean, my son's room actually wants a color. When you see the photos of it in the book, it looks very as well daylit as the rest of our home, but it's actually pretty, where it is in the building, it doesn't get as much daylight, and it would do for a color in there, would
mm,
suit it better than the white walls. But I haven't had the the bravery to try that yet.
because of the design fails you've had so far.
Yes, well, and his idea is that would be like digger yellow, which it's not going to be.
So
Definitely not.
intense.
Yes.
Yeah, letting children choose paint colors, I like to have them involved, but I don't let them just choose because it would be it's intense. They are not afraid of bold colors, children.
Yeah, I mean, what my mom did with me when I was a girl, when I was choosing a wallpaper, was she gave me, I think, maybe four that I could choose from. And I
Hmm.
think that letting kids pick between options you've already edited is the best.
Yeah, because you're still teaching them choice. You're still teaching them how to live with the choices they make, but you're not having to then battle when they bring home something insane. And now you have to say, you have to be all no's. We don't want to be no. No is no fun.
Yes.
So tell me about something in your home that makes you seriously happy. What do you love?
Oh, well, we are so lucky. We have some art that was painted by people we love. I have over my bed a painting that my grandfather painted. And in my son's room, we have a painting by my great aunt. And then we have four of her smaller paintings. And those are truly some of my most cherished possessions. I find them beautiful. I love that these people, who are my relatives made them. And I also really value them because they both were people who had other careers and lives and still found time to have these creative pursuits that they were, painting in addition to being a teacher, or painting in addition to working, in an advertising agency. And that to me is very inspiring, that you can live a creative life and still, have a 9 to 5 job.
That's really wonderful. I love that. And I love that it's speaking to the fact that having a small space does not mean it's not filled with things that are personal and unique and meaningful. Maybe just fewer of them. So you may not have the entire collection of your aunt's work, but you have a piece that's special to you.
Yeah, I'd fit them in if someone would give me more.
In case anybody's listening who has a couple of them. What advice would you give to somebody else who wants to create their own happy place?
Just to take it step by step. It's not going to happen overnight. To get your home the way that you want it is actually a lot of work. And it will take time trying different things and slowly saving up to buy the things that you want, but that it is absolutely worthwhile. If you're happy when you come home at the end of the day, or if you're happy when you're there all day, I think it enriches your life. And sometimes, some days I think that what I do for work, writing about decorating and organizing, is, a little frivolous, but then, ultimately our home is where our lives play out, and it is very significant. So I would say if you're trying to make your home a happy place, just keep at it a little bit every day. If you can make your sock drawer a happy place today, and get rid of every one of those singleton socks, like that's a step in the right direction. So just a little bit by bit.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And you have another book coming out, is that right, on bunk beds? Why did you choose to do that?
So there's a couple of bunk beds in the Little Book of Living Small. A bunk bed is a really fantastic space-saving solution. And my son was particularly enamored of one bunk bed in particular. It was like a custom L-shaped bunk. And he would always want to see that page in the book and look at it. And then he said one day, he said, "Mommy, you should write a book about bunk beds." And he's also obsessed with bunk beds. He wants bunk beds. Bunk beds are actually coming tomorrow. But I actually was like, "Oh, well, I'll get him a book about bunk beds. Like, for sure. Like, we could get a book about bunk beds." And I went to look, and there was not a book about bunk beds.
Wow.
At least not currently in print, not like a design type of book. And so I said, and, I sort of started a little research about what was out there. And I could even immediately think of a few projects I had written about in my career. And the more I looked, the more I realized there's just a wide world of bunk beds. And everybody kind of loves a bunk bed. They're joyful. They are cozy. And so I pitched it, and now here I am writing it.
Well, in the current book, You talk about the Murphy beds. You
Mhm.
do feature several bunk beds, and you also talk about really investing in some of these pieces. I know that some of the people you wrote about were choosing higher end beds, especially for the mobile ones, where they're literally putting them away every single day. And I think that that was an interesting thing for me to note. Like there are times to invest a little bit more, save up, as you said a second ago, so that you don't end up having a burden in your house that should have been a blessing.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is especially for anyone considering a Murphy bed. This is like a big thing. I had a Murphy bed in an old studio apartment with a fantastic mechanism. Never gave me trouble, up and down every day. And I have also encountered ones that were maybe less expensive models, and they're a nightmare. So something with mechanicals, it is definitely important to get things that function well. But the same thing is true for bunk beds. I did, one of my mom friends emailed me just the other day. She said, well, what kind of bunk bed should we get? We're thinking about getting XYZ. And I said, you want something pretty sturdy, like this is a place maybe not to, get the cheapest thing on a big home retailer website to really, get something that you feel good, like you could climb up and get into the top bunk of it.
I'm assuming kids are like my brothers were. They had their bunk beds and they would stand on the top bunk and jump onto the bottom bunk. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a lot of aggressive behavior towards a piece of furniture.
Yeah, another thing I definitely believe in investing in is upholstered furniture, like your sofa. That's something that a cheap one is landfill bound a
Mhm.
lot sooner than something of higher quality and better construction. A good sofa could last you a lifetime, and it will be worth it to have a new slipcover made or to have it reupholstered. But the cheapy one, there's the cushions will degrade, the upholstery will look sloppy, and you'll be ready to replace it. And that's something that is ultimately getting thrown out. So things like that, and that's something that you would probably be most likely buying new, not secondhand.
Where do you think are the places to, if there are any places, to shop more disposably, less expensively, the online big box store kinds of places?
Yeah, I mean, I personally keep a spreadsheet of home brands that I think are making a real effort on this front. The most sustainable choice is always to buy something secondhand that has had a previous life and that you are keeping it in circulation. That's like number one most sustainable thing. Then beyond that, um, you know, it's piece by piece. Some brands might be doing a really good job in one sector of their manufacturing, but not another. So it takes a little research. It takes, some reading through the marketing jargon, because there's a lot and everyone wants to be sustainable right now. But I definitely, for like something like a sofa, I'd be looking for something made here in the US. I would be looking for closely at the cushioning, what it's made of, and thinking about that.
Mhm.
So it's hard to pull out like a single brand that is
Yeah.
like really
I
doing it.
think the takeaway is just thinking about it, right?
Oh
Not
yeah.
not going on autopilot in the first place. And I love your tip that secondhand is the most sustainable option that there is. And with technology today, there's Craigslist and OfferUp, and which I think just bought Let Go, so now there's only one of those. But and what is it, Neighborly and Free Cycle? There's so many ways. Cherish for some of the higher end awesome pieces. So many ways to get your hands on things that have already had a chapter, and you can be their next chapter.
Yeah, and I mean yard sales and estate sales and secondhand shops. I mean, there's a wide world out there, and truly almost everything in my home was purchased secondhand. So that I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah. What do you think the trick to it is, though? Because not everybody can do that successfully, so there's separate from being a pleasure, because I love the treasure hunt myself,
Yeah.
but not everybody does. But so separate from it being a pleasure, do you go armed? Do you always have a pocket full of measurements in your purse? How do you make sure that when you see the thing, because it's not like you can go back and get it later?
Well, I mean, I think that some things are pretty standard sizes, right? Like a three-seater sofa there's not a great variety in length there. So if you have room for a full-size sofa, you can probably, find that yours will fit. So I've never been a person who like carried about measurements. The times when I need something very specific to fit a very specific spot, I do a lot of research, and I'll be looking online. That won't be the serendipitous, like, oh, you found it in a shop. My tiny little desk, I knew I had like a certain amount of wall between the windows in an apartment, and I was looking at Craigslist at every single thing that would fit that little spot. The dresser in my son's room, I knew we had exactly 4 feet, and that was it. And that just filtered everything we looked at had to fit between the two doors that opened.
Those limitations do create a filter so that you're not
Yeah.
by all the options, only one
Yes.
would fit. Yeah. What would you want to leave people with listening today?
I would hope that if they're in a small space that they're feeling not so happy about, that they start to try to find a way to be seriously happy about their small space, and to try and fit their current life into their current home, whatever that may look like. And I would love for people to start to think about that connection between sustainability and our homes. I think we've all done such a good job thinking about with things like the food we eat. We're thinking about organic and local. There's a big movement towards sustainable fashion. But I think for home, it's so often people are looking for a quick, cheap solution that may not be the best and most sustainable choice over time.
So a less disposable lifestyle in as many aspects as we can come up with.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, where can folks find you and all of your books? Because now it's going to be multiple.
Well, the Little Book of Living Small is available wherever books are sold, and be that your local bookstore or that really big bookseller online. And then they can find me on Instagram. I'm just my name, laura.alice.fenton. And I hopefully read my articles in magazines and find my name there.
Absolutely. Wonderful. And of course, all those things will be in the show notes. I'm so glad that you were here today to share this conversation with me and to share your space with everybody, not just in this podcast episode, but in a book. I mean, that's a fairly vulnerable thing to do. So it's really kind of you to give other people inspiration for creating their own small spaces.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It was a lovely conversation.
I enjoyed every minute of it, and I hope you, our listeners, did too. I hope that you enjoyed the episode and that you feel a little bit more encouraged and empowered to make your home your happy place, no matter what size it is. Obviously, if you feel stuck, please check out my book, Happy Starts at Home, or Laura's book, The Little Book of Living Small. Both of them are really filled with practical advice to help you figure out what could help your home work better for you? Not just aspirational. It's not just like, oh, look at these pretty pictures. Both of these books are meant to help you take action on your home and identify what needs to change and how it could change to suit you. And if you have a specific design dilemma in your home and you're really stuck, you can reach out to my team at Seriously Happy Homes. We can meet with you over Zoom to figure out those next practical steps to creating your happy place. In the meantime, no matter where you call home and no matter what size it is, I hope it makes you seriously happy. Until next time.